time an individual exercises their free will to make a trivial daily choice, they actively burn the finite reserves of cellular adenosine triphosphate required for fluid intelligence. The human brain was fundamentally not designed to process infinite options. Attempting to navigate total freedom without severe external constraints accelerates cognitive decay and induces immediate mental paralysis. Elite performers ruthlessly restrict their daily routines to preserve metabolic energy. Ignoring this clinical data ensures the organism will continue to sacrifice its neurological capacity for the mere illusion of control. Modern hustle culture aggressively promotes the concept of absolute freedom. Society equates having endless daily options with power, status, and success. The average professional wakes up and immediately faces a barrage of micro-decisions: what to wear, what to eat, which emails to answer first, and which software tabs to keep open. They believe that navigating this complex web of choices is a marker of high-level autonomy. Clinical neuroscience proves the exact opposite. Every single choice, regardless of how trivial or insignificant it appears to the conscious mind, acts as a severe cognitive tax. Human prefrontal cortex is the biological epicenter for rational thought, impulse control, and complex decision-making. However, it is an incredibly fragile and highly inefficient biological processor. It operates on a strictly limited supply of glucose and metabolic energy. When an organism is forced to constantly evaluate variables, weigh potential outcomes, and select a path forward, the prefrontal cortex violently drains these energy reserves. It does not differentiate between choosing a life-altering corporate strategy and choosing a brand of coffee. The biological mechanism remains identical, and the metabolic cost is deducted from the exact same account. By prioritizing total freedom, the modern worker unknowingly bankrupts their own cognitive architecture before the workday has even truly begun. They arrive at their desk believing they are ready to execute deep, analytical labor, completely unaware that their capacity for fluid intelligence has already been decimated. The brain enters a state of localized exhaustion. To protect the organism from complete energetic collapse, the central nervous system forces a cognitive shutdown. It actively blocks the capacity for deep focus, resulting in a clinical state universally recognized as severe mental fog. The pursuit of total freedom mathematically guarantees profound mediocrity. Why micro-decisions destroy focus? The devastating impact of having too many options becomes undeniable when analyzing the evolutionary architecture of the sensory nervous system. The human body contains approximately 11 million sensory receptors. Staggeringly, over 10 million of those receptors are entirely dedicated to vision. Some evolutionary biologists estimate that nearly half of the brain's total resources are constantly utilized just to process visual data. Because the organism is so heavily dependent on sight, visual cues act as the absolute greatest catalyst for human behavior. When a professional operates in an environment filled with infinite choices, multiple open software windows, a smartphone blinking with notifications, a desk littered with different projects, their visual cortex is bombarded with an unmanageable volume of stimuli. The brain fundamentally operates as a prediction machine. It must continuously scan the environment, analyze every single visual cue, and predict whether that cue represents a threat or a reward. When the environment presents too many options, the prediction engine overheats. The biological cost of this sensory overload is catastrophic. The brain must constantly spend precious mental bandwidth actively ignoring the visual cues of distraction. Ignoring a stimulus requires just as much, if not more, caloric expenditure as engaging with it. The organism is fighting an unwinnable biological war against its own surroundings. As the prefrontal cortex fatigues from the sheer volume of micro-decisions, the individual loses the neurological capacity to sustain attention. The focus fractures not because the individual lacks ambition, but because the biological machine has literally run out of the fuel required to maintain a single trajectory. They assume they possess a weak attention span, entirely blind to the fact that their chaotic, choice-rich environment is actively suffocating their neuron. The biology of decision fatigue. The degradation of cognitive performance is not a psychological weakness. It is a measurable physical deterioration of cellular energy. When the prefrontal cortex reaches a state of severe decision fatigue, the biological hierarchy of the brain shifts dramatically. The conscious, rational mind, often referred to as System 2 by behavioral psychologists, completely shuts down to conserve remaining energy reserves. Instantly, the primitive, non-conscious regions of the brain hijack the central nervous system. The amygdala, which governs fear, emotion, and instant gratification, takes full control of the organism's behavior. This neurological shift dictates why individuals make highly destructive choices at the end of a chaotic day. After spending 8 hours navigating a high-friction environment filled with constant micro-decisions, the professional lacks the biological hardware to resist temptation. The capacity for delayed gratification is entirely erased. The organism naturally gravitates toward the path of least resistance. It seeks highly concentrated, immediate rewards to suit the exhausted nervous system. This manifests as binge eating hyperpalatable foods, mindless scrolling on digital platforms, or the consumption of alcohol. Furthermore, this chronic cycle of decision fatigue and subsequent dopamine-seeking behavior induces severe metabolic stress. The constant fluctuation of energy states forces the adrenal glands to secrete elevated levels of cortisol. Over time, this chronic exposure to stress hormones physically degrades mitochondrial density within the brain cell. The mitochondria are the cellular powerhouses responsible for generating ATP. As their efficiency drops, the individual experiences a permanent baseline of lethargy. The toxic illusion of freedom not only destroys daily productivity, it accelerates cellular senescence, prematurely aging the biological machine. The illusion of total freedom. The entire consumer economy is fundamentally engineered to exploit this biological vulnerability, monetizing the exhaustion of the human mind. In 1952, the economist Hawkins Stern identified a behavioral phenomenon known as suggestion impulse buying. Stern discovered that shoppers frequently purchase products not because they possess an internal desire for them, but simply because of how those products are presented in the physical environment. The visual cue itself manufactures the craving. Items placed at eye level are purchased exponentially more often than items placed near the floor. The environment dictates the behavior. This clinical reality destroys the cultural myth of free will. Humans like to believe they are the sovereign commanders of their own lives. If a professional chooses to browse social media instead of executing deep work, they assume it was a conscious, autonomous choice. The truth is far more disturbing. The actions taken each day are rarely shaped by purposeful drive. They are shaped by the most obvious and immediate options available in the environment. The organism simply reacts to the architectural design of its surroundings. In 1936, the psychologist Kurt Lewin formulated a groundbreaking equation stating that behavior is mathematically a function of the person interacting with their environment. The environment always wins. When an individual surrounds themselves with infinite choices, they are not increasing their freedom. They are exponentially increasing their exposure to behavioral manipulation. Every single object, application, and notification acts as an invisible hand, subtly pulling the organism's energy in 1,000 different directions. The professional remains trapped in a permanent state of reactivity, continuously sacrificing their long-term potential simply to respond to the immediate demands of their chaotic surroundings. Why the elite restrict their options? To escape this metabolic drain, one must completely invert the traditional approach to personal autonomy and actively pursue limitation. The top 1% of global performers operate on a frequency that directly contradicts modern advice. They do not seek more freedom, they engineer severe, unbreakable constraints. They understand that to achieve elite cognitive output, they must brutally eliminate the requirement for conscious choice. Consider the daily routine of legendary choreographer Twyla Tharp. To guarantee her monumental physical and creative output, Tharp eliminated every single micro-decision associated with her morning workout. She did not debate which gym to attend, what exercises to perform, or whether she felt motivated enough to be. Instead, she reduced the entire massive endeavor down to one single, automated action: stepping outside her apartment and hailing a cab. The moment she instructed the driver to head to the gym, the ritual was completed. By stripping away all alternative options and making the very first step entirely mindless, she completely bypassed the amygdala's resistance to caloric expenditure. This concept relies on mastering what clinical psychologists refer to as decisive moments. Every day contains a handful of hypercondensed choices that act as a fork in the road. The moment a professional decides to open a new browser tab or leave their phone in another room is a decisive moment. It is an entry point that dictates the trajectory of the organism for the next several hours. Elite performers do not rely on heroic discipline to sustain focus over a long period. They simply master these decisive moments. They engineer their environment so that making the correct initial choice requires absolutely zero cognitive friction. Once the optimal path is selected, the momentum of the habit automatically carries the organism forward. Engineering a frictionless reality. The ultimate neurological biohack is not the addition of new productivity tools. It is the ruthless, systemic subtraction of alternatives. To permanently eradicate mental fog and preserve cellular ATP, the individual must transition from being a passive consumer of their environment to becoming its primary architect. This process demands the implementation of severe commitment devices, choices made in the present that permanently lock in optimal behavior in the future. The environment must be optimized to make bad habits mathematically impossible and good habits biologically inevitable. In the 1970s, researchers analyzed the energy crisis in the Netherlands. They discovered that homeowners living in identical houses with identical energy prices consumed drastically different amounts of electricity. The single determining factor was the location of the electrical meter. Houses where the meter was highly visible in the main hallway used significantly less energy than houses where the meter was hidden in the basement. When the cue was obvious, the behavior automatically shifted. The environment did the heavy lifting. Similarly, when the British government simply linked citizens directly to a tax form rather than directing them to a web page where the form had to be downloaded, tax collection rates skyrocketed, generating millions in revenue by removing a single micro-decision from the process. This is the exact blueprint for reprogramming the human machine. The professional must strip their physical and digital reality of all competing options. The smartphone must be permanently banished from the workspace. Digital routers must be programmed to automatically sever internet connections during deep work blocks. The workspace must be sterilized of all visual clutter, leaving only the exact tools required for the immediate task. True cognitive dominance is achieved through absolute simplification. When the brain is no longer forced to process infinite trivial choices, massive reserves of metabolic energy are liberated. This preserved ATP is instantly redirected toward fluid intelligence, deep memory consolidation, and hyperdense analytical labor. The illusion of freedom is the trap of the amateur. The strategic application of restriction is the weapon of the elite. Now, the critical question must be asked. Does the modern professional actually possess free will, or is their daily behavior entirely dictated by the chaotic cues of an unoptimized environment? Drop the answer in the comments below, as engaging with this clinical data physically reinforces a new neurological baseline. If this classified breakdown exposed the cognitive tax draining the system, subscribe and activate the notification bell. The global elite do not waste energy deciding what to do. They restrict their options and they execute.